Home health aide roasted my pet snake's frozen rats instead of squash, filling my entire house with a rancid stench. I'm disabled, and need help with stuff around the house. Today was the second day with a new agency and new home health aide, Tina. I set it up so she would come by in the morning while I'm sleeping. Insomnia is killer, and I texted her last night what I would need done today. One of those things was to roast some pre-cut squash I'd gotten so I could have it with my salads and pasta. I was very clear in my instructions, what it looked like, where it was in the fridge, how to use the oven, how to cook it. I also have a roommate who was up and told her she could ask them for help if she couldn't find anything. Or come get me if truly necessary. Now, I have 3 pet ball pythons. They eat rats that I thaw from frozen in the fridge in a reusable plastic bag. Yes, that's where I'm going with this. Tina couldn't find the squash, and so, obviously, that meant she should roast the first other thing she could see that was technically also encased in plastic, in a completely different area of the fridge. The fucking rats. In butter and salt, in my nice baking dish. And that's insane all on its own, but if you're going to cook any animal, you should at least clean and skin it first, right? Do the crazy, disgusting thing properly so I can respect the effort, instead of sticking them in as is. Fur and guts and all. And the smell. Good God baby Jesus, the smell. It woke me up and had me gagging the moment I opened my bedroom door. Definitely not squash. Or food smelling for that matter. At first I thought the squash had spontaneously rotted overnight and she'd tried to cook it anyway. That would have been slightly less insane and much preferable. I had to pull it out of her what she was cooking instead when she said she couldn't find it. It was in plain sight, had to open the oven and see my snake's dinners in place of my own and still couldn't process what the fuck was happening, what I was looking at and smelling. I don't like yelling at people and generally avoid it. Today was a day for exceptions. And at the end of my half-crazed, dissociative rant, I told her to get the whole dish and its contents and herself out of the fucking house. And to not come back. Suffice to say, I've contacted the agency to report it and am requesting a new aide. Now I'm sitting at a cafe trying to calm down and eat something despite the scent memory that's taken up permanent residence and turning my stomach. The whole house reeks like musty, sewage-dipped pork that had been left out for a whole day before being cooked in rancid oil, and I'm not sure Febreze is gonna cut it. I don't want to go home. Edit, some further clarification about things people were asking in the comments. Tina spoke fluent English without an accent. She's either native or has been speaking it since very young. We'd also spoken early that morning when she arrived, over the phone, woke me up where I was sleeping upstairs, but whatever, I'd rather too much communication than too little, because she wanted to clarify about the squash. She specifically acknowledged the concept of squash, and asked if it was near the kale she was seeing. I said that sounded right, and that it should be labeled. She said okay. I reminded her that if she couldn't find it, to ask my roommate for help. The rats were on the top shelf of our freezer top fridge so that you'd have to be leaning down to even see it, and no kale would be in its vicinity. 3 people live in this house, so it's always full. Lots of options if you're gonna go rogue. She didn't know I had snakes, unless she'd seen them in their bins in the living room, which is possible. It looks like a filling cabinet with clear plastic drawers and sometimes they come to the front. They're very quiet pets and don't even count with my landlord, so sometimes I forget to mention them when people ask about pets, as they usually are asking due to allergy concerns. So when the agency asked, I was focused on our cats. They know now, of course. But Tina had no reason to think she should be preparing a pet's meal. That was never established as something among her duties when I met with her and an agency nurse the day before to go over everything. Also, snakes can't eat cooked meat, even if it's safely prepared. It will make them sick. So they could not still be used. Update 1. As I'm sure you can imagine, the last week was exhausting. This is just to give what closure I can and go over how my last conversation with Tina went, the day after the incident. When I was on my way to the cafe to escape the house last Tuesday, she actually texted me with an apology, saying I'm so sorry, I feel so stupid and bad. This never happened before, and offering to pay me back for the rats and the dish as I had mentioned the rats were expensive. Which is honestly more than I was expecting, but, never happened before. Well, I sure fucking hope so. Though that begs the question, why now? Why me? I don't know if there's a good answer. We agreed that she could come by the next day in the evening with the money, $15 for the rats, $30 for the dish. She declined doing Venmo or something similar. Possibly didn't know how to use things like that. Since I estimate by her comment of her grandson being my age, she had to be at minimum in her late 60s, probably older. I admit I was hesitant to have her return to the scene of the crime when it was still so unclear what her motivations had truly been, but I wouldn't be home alone, and she had seemed sincerely contrite, if a bit defensive over the degree of my outrage. Before the appointed time, she called me to tell me she was on her way, and then made, of all things, a request of me. She would be bringing by her timesheet, and could I sign for the 2 days she'd been there? I was baffled. The audacity of asking me a favor when our meeting was about her making amends, claiming that her time with me should count as doing her job, and implying that her paying me back was to get something from me. Maybe that was why she wanted to do cash? But at this point, I just wanted the whole thing over and done with, and it's not like I was the one who'd be paying her, just my insurance. It was also confusing because, did that mean that she was still employed? Surely if she'd been fired, she'd be less willing to play nice with me, would probably be blaming me more for how it affected her. At the very least, she seemed like the kind of person who would bring it up to make me feel a little bad, but maybe she wouldn't, I don't know. It was also strange because out of the 3, now 4, HHAs I've had at 2 different companies, none have ever asked me to sign a timesheet for them. Maybe some of y'all more familiar with the inner workings of these companies can shed some light here. I was nervous when she showed up. There's something about seeing someone do something so truly unhinged that shatters the basic trust that this fellow human won't do something else crazy, maybe something more harmful than running one out of the house. So I checked her hands through the window before I opened the door. She had 2 plastic bags half full and bundled up to hide their contents under each arm. Strange choice for a weapon, so I chose faith. There was no more apology upon greeting, she mostly just seemed in a hurry, civil but brusque, like she wanted this behind her as much as I did. While she was rummaging, I asked how she'd disposed of the dish, the follow-up to I made a video about, linked in the original post if you want to see, you shickos. And as expected, the first thing she brought out was her timesheet. Sure enough, there was a place for patient signature, and as I took it in the proffered pen and set it against the doorframe to sign, I said, "We said $45, right? Just to confirm." The look she gave me as she reached into her jacket was so offended, and her civility evaporated. Like I was questioning her word, and how dare I? "I'm gonna pay you," I said I would. "Calm down, paranoid," was the tone. It took all my self-control not to respond with, "You also said you'd cook the squash." Like, yeah, lady, wonder why I would want to triple check anything we agreed to at this point. My bad. But she did in fact hand me the wad of bills, after I'd handed back the timesheet and she'd checked it, and then she left in a bit of a huff. I just told her to take care of herself to her back. At this point, after interacting with her again, I am of the opinion that this was simply from some form of psychosis, either a mental health thing or senility, I don't know. Even talking to her, things were just a little off. Hard to describe, but it was like part of her attention was always somewhere else. I do not believe this was malicious or weaponized incompetence as many were saying in the TikTok comments. She had nothing to gain from this, and clearly she wants to keep her job. At this point, after the shock and horror has worn off, I just feel kind of bad for her. She clearly shouldn't be in this profession, which, BTW, she said she's been in for 30 years. So I more blame these companies for not being more thorough in their hiring and training process. Psych evils should be par for the course, surely. And I know I probably shouldn't have, it's none of my business, but it was eating at my conscience to not express my concern, because I don't know what's going on in her life. When it comes to things like reality breaks and changes in behavior, it can be really hard to see for ourselves, and maybe the people in her life aren't saying anything, and so she's not seeking the help she needs. So I texted her a little while after she left. I thanked her for taking responsibility, acknowledged I was butting in, and then brought up how she said this had never happened before and how she'd seemed confused about how it happened. And that if this was a new kind of thing or there'd been other weird things happening, it might be a good idea to talk to a doctor, just in case something else is going on that needs to be addressed, as gently and non-judgmentally as I could think to say. And I ended it with, "But if I'm way off base and out of line, and you're just used to people eating like that, I apologize and wish you the best." After a day of silence, she sent 2 texts, copied here. "K, thank you, people make mistakes, God bless, have a good day," that was and I'm sure will remain the last I heard from her. I'm sorry I can't recount some detailed confession about how it had all been a nefarious plot by some vengeful ex who'd had their aunt impersonate an aide to poison me. That would have made for a much more satisfying story. As for my current aide situation, I'm still working with the replacement they sent to me, but I've already requested a new one. She's sane and competent, but alas, it would seem she much exaggerated her English fluency to my coordinator, who sounded resigned to such a deceit. In any other service context, I wouldn't care, we have translator apps, but I think we've seen how critical clear and easy communication can be when one person is relying on another to meet their needs while sick. Others have told me how long it can take to find a good fit, so I guess I'll just have to keep spinning the revolving door until I do. Also, I have put in a request for the agency to reimburse me the takeout I had to get myself that day. And the oven has been cleaned and sanitized to within an inch of its life and seems okay now? I dunno, asking for a replacement or suing anyone seems like a lot of hassle, especially when I already have a medical malpractice case in the works. Thank you to everyone for taking an interest in my harrowing experience and for your support. It legitimately turned this into something more lighthearted that I can laugh at now, where it would have remained traumatic otherwise. May your squash always be squash. Update 2. A few days after my last update, I was home alone when my doorbell rang. I checked my phone, no expected deliveries, no texts from my roommate. Weird. I peek out the window, and my soul leaves my body. It's Tina, standing there like nothing happened. Holding something. Now, I don't know if you've ever experienced the unique horror of an unexpected sequel to an event you thought was over, but let me tell you, my body rejected reality in that moment. I literally just stood there behind the curtain, internally screaming, trying to figure out if maybe I was hallucinating. But she rang again, and I had to make a choice. I cracked the door open, chain still on, and just went, "Tina? What are you doing here? And guys, She holds up a Tupperware container. I made you something to apologize, she says. I have never been more terrified of home-cooked food in my life. She tries to hand it to me, and I swear to God, my first instinct was to dodge it. Like she was holding a live grenade. I could not stop my brain from whispering, what if it's more rats? I ask, Tina. What is that? And she, completely serious, says, squash. The incident, part 2 now. If this were a movie, this would be the part where the screen goes black and the words 3 days earlier pop up, because I had already heard about this squash from my coordinator. Apparently, Tina, who, yes, was officially fired, had called the agency and told them she felt bad about the misunderstanding and wanted to bring me the squash she owed me. Because according to her, the real mistake was that she just didn't cook squash like I wanted, not that she roasted frozen rodents in butter like a medieval curse. No. The only problem was that she had grabbed the wrong thing. I told my coordinator, yeah, please don't give her my address. She assured me they wouldn't. And yet, here she was. I was still at the door, still staring at this squash like it might be a Horcrux. And then she says, in the calmest, most reasonable voice, you don't have to take it if you don't want to, but I wanted to show you that I can cook the right way, MAAM. The sheer audacity. At this point, my brain has officially thrown in the towel and left me to fend for myself, so I just blurt out, Tina, how did you get my address? And her response? Oh, I remembered the street name and just drove around until I saw your house, so that's a thing that happened to me. I go, Tina, you can't do that. You were fired. You can't just show up at my house. And she nods, looking genuinely confused, and goes, I know, but I still felt bad, like this was a totally normal way to process guilt. I had no idea how to respond to that, so I just defaulted to, I need you to leave. She sighed like I was being unreasonable, left the squash on my porch, and walked off. Just like that. No fight, no argument. Just a weird little sigh, like she was disappointed in me. I watched her get into her car and drive away. And that's when I realized. That Tupperware of squash was still sitting on my porch. Post-incident analysis, I called my coordinator immediately to let them know that Tina somehow found me and that this was definitely not normal behavior. They were horrified, promised to make sure she was blacklisted from the agency, and apologized profusely. Then my roommate came home and found me staring at the Tupperware like it was a cursed object. What's that? They asked. Squash, I whispered. They asked if I was going to open it. Absolutely not, for all I knew, she had cooked it in the same dish. Maybe she had made the squash while thinking about rats. Maybe the squash had absorbed the energy of the rats. I was not going to risk it. We ended up dumping the whole thing in the trash, container and all, and dousing it with bleach for good measure. Current status: so, where do things stand now? Tina has, presumably, moved on with her life. Hopefully far away from mine. I still don't know how she found my house. I can only assume witchcraft. My new aide? Also fired. Not for anything dramatic, just. She was supposed to do light housekeeping, and instead, she would just pretend to clean. Like, she would turn the vacuum on and let it run while standing in another room on her phone. My house remains rat-free and squash deficient. I am officially out of patience with this home health agency and considering switching. Now on to second story. Sister-in-law banned my wife from their baby shower over a joke. Now I must choose between family loyalty or marital support. I'm male 30, recently married the love of my life F28, and I'm super close with my brother M35. We always imagined our families being close too, until one single lunch ruined everything. So, my wife and I went out to eat with my brother and my Sil F31, who is pregnant and about to give birth to my first nephew. Needless to say, we are all very excited. Mid-meal, my brother, probably feeling sentimental, goes, man, I hope the baby turns out like me. He was such a cute kid. Now, a bit about my Sil. She's usually nice and I like her, but she's definitely type A and a bit high maintenance. Without missing a beat, she shuts my brother down. No, I'd much rather he turns out like you. A bit of an awkward comment, and my brother probably thought so as well, so he goes, no, seriously, we'd be lucky if the kid was like me. He was such a nice and cute kid. And then, Sil doubles down, no, but you're so much more handsome, before turning to look directly at me and adding, no offense. Now, look. I wasn't deeply offended. My brother is a very good-looking guy, so I get it. But who just says that out loud? My wife, who had been quiet up to this point, clearly found it rude. So she jokingly goes, well, as long as the baby doesn't look like Sil, we should be fine. I chuckled. My brother laughed. Sil did not laugh. She immediately got pissed, glared at my wife, and went, what the hell does that mean? That's extremely rude. We're not close enough for jokes like that. My wife was taken aback and so was I. My brother tried to say something but she stormed out. My brother followed her, looking about as confused as I felt. Fast forward to today, Sil has officially disinvited my wife from the baby shower/celebration. My wife says she doesn't even want to go, which, fair enough. My brother is devastated and really wants me to be there. Now, here's the thing, my brother adores me. He's always been my biggest supporter, and he wants me to be a big part of my nephew's life. He's having his first child, and this moment is really important to him. I love my brother too and can't see him sad like that. He says both my wife and Sil need to apologize eventually, but we shouldn't force it right now and give them some time to cool off. He also thinks Sil owes me an apology for what she said, but again, pregnancy hormones or whatever, so he doesn't want to push it yet. My parents actually side with my wife and think Sil was out of line first. But they also believe I shouldn't miss such a huge moment in my brother's life, and that we should cut Sil some slack because of her pregnancy. Here's my issue. I don't feel right going if my wife isn't welcome. I want to support her, but I also know this moment means the world to my brother. If I go, my wife might feel abandoned. If I don't, my brother will be heartbroken. I feel completely stuck. Update 1. First, some clarifications. My wife is not a mean person. She made a joke in the moment, although I admit that it wasn't a great joke given the sensitivity of the situation. But she's genuinely one of the kindest, most caring people I know. That's one of the reasons I love her so much. I don't think my brother did anything wrong by bringing up the topic. We were reminiscing about childhood, and he probably got nostalgic about having his little brother following him everywhere. My brother and I resemble each other quite a bit, though he's definitely the better looking one. Funny how that works. And just to be clear, that doesn't mean I'm insecure. If anything, he's the outlier. He's one of those people who naturally turns heads. Even when we were younger, he'd get random girls hitting on him wherever he went. It was such a running joke in our family that even my parents would tease him about it. The entire conversation lasted less than 5 minutes and escalated very quickly. I agree with the comments that all of us should have handled the situation better. But easier to say that in hindsight. In real time, things just got out of hand very quickly. I am sure that all of us regret what we said in the moment. Now for the actual update. I told my wife that I wouldn't go unless she was also invited. She immediately told me that she didn't want to be the reason I missed it and that I should go if I wanted to. She even said she'd be willing to apologize if my Sil was open to it, but that she wouldn't attend even if re-invited because she'd feel uncomfortable. I told her I appreciated that, but for me, it was both of us or none of us. Then I called my brother, and this is where I have to give him a lot of credit, because I know he was upset. He had really wanted me there, and I could hear the disappointment in his voice. But instead of pushing, he just said, "I get it, man. Don't worry about it." I know that wasn't easy for him to say. He had to balance keeping things calm with his wife while also wanting his brother by his side. But he didn't guilt trip me, didn't try to convince me otherwise, he just let me make my choice. He even said, "Don't worry, we'll save you guys some food and I'll drop it off later." I offered to help with setup if he needed it, and told him to say I have COVID to avoid awkward questions. He just laughed and said, "Got it. You caught the world's shortest COVID, just long enough for the baby shower but miraculously recovered the next day." Now, here's where things got a bit more complicated. My mom was not happy with him for not sorting this out earlier. She felt like he should have stepped in and made peace before it got to the point where my wife was uninvited. But my parents didn't say anything directly because they didn't want to get involved in the drama. I think that really weighed on him. He was already trying to navigate a tough situation, and now he had our parents silently judging him too. It put him in an impossible position, trying to be a good husband, a good brother, and a good son all at once. A couple of days passed with no further drama. Then something unexpected happened. My wife got a call from my Sil. At first, my wife panicked, thinking she was about to get yelled at. But instead, they actually had a really good conversation. I overheard bits of it, including my wife saying, "No, you're gorgeous." Which made me laugh a little. After the call, my wife told me that Sil actually apologized first. She admitted that she'd been feeling really self-conscious about her looks during pregnancy and that my wife's joke had hit a sore spot. A little later, my brother called me. He told me that he had gently talked to Sil and helped her see that things had gotten out of hand. He also told me that knowing my wife was willing to apologize had made a huge difference. And then, he admitted something. He had wanted to fix things before the baby shower, but he knew his wife was already under a lot of stress. He didn't want to add more pressure on her while she was in the middle of planning. And honestly, I respect that. My Sil is one of those people who needs everything to be perfect, her look, my brother's look, the house, the decorations, etc., so I can understand the pressure she must have put on herself. And my brother knew that pushing her while she was stressed wouldn't have helped, so he waited. And after the event, when things calmed down, he quietly stepped in and fixed things. So where do things stand now? Things seem good on the surface. My wife and Sil made peace, and my brother and I are fine. My wife and I have decided to just be extra sensitive around Sil given what she is going through. All in all, the situation seems to have brought us somewhat closer together. The real takeaway, I have an amazing wife, but her humor could use some work. Also, my brother ain't too bad. Side note, speaking of whom, my brother will probably never see this because he only uses Reddit for sports and news, or so he says, but in the off chance he does, well, guess I'm busted. But since I have your attention, I'll admit something just this once. You are the best bro I could have asked for. That time you helped me for uni, I don't think you know how much it really meant to me. And when I was at a really low point, you stood by me. I don't think I've ever said it, but I've always appreciated that. Of course, I won't ever admit this in person and will forever deny I ever wrote this. Edit, everyone keeps asking why my wife didn't apologize first. I thought I made it clear in the post, but maybe not. My wife was going to apologize but wanted to check if Sil was open to it. She had just been uninvited, so we had no idea whether my Sil was even open to talking to her. I had told my brother that my wife wanted to apologize, and if he had given us the green light, my wife would have absolutely called. Instead, my Sil decided to call once my brother told her that my wife wanted to apologize. That was her being the bigger person.